Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. My name is Hamza Ali. For those of you new to this channel, I review all things TV and movies. So if you like what you hear, share, like, and subscribe down below. This was the hardest episode to review. It was a beautifully well shot episode, but I had to watch it a second time to really appreciate how amazing. I mean, they clearly have a bigger picture in mind. Right? Like every episode is clearly, like they have a story to tell and they are telling it very well. So I was very excited for this episode because we finally find out who Ellie really is. This whole episode is about choices and making the right choices, right? There's these repeated conversations about you can do this or you could do that. And it was an incredibly well organized episode that, you know, ties in previous episodes in very like subtle ways, but it's not obvious unless you're looking for it. The first thing I have to say, like that mall, the way they shot the mall was amazing, right? This whole like 4 wonders of the mall or 5 wonders, like shout out to Ellie because she does not need alcohol to stay buzzed. But the mall was like a museum, right? Like they're kind of going through all these places as if it's like the Smithsonian, right? Like remember escalators, remember arcades, like it was very like remember the olden days. And it's really interesting because just I guess at the start of the pandemic people were like rating things, you know, like buying sneakers instead of soap. So shout out to the people who are stocking up on toilet paper during COVID-19. But I think most people thought this would be temporary, but it ended up being much longer. And the other thing I noticed is that how far back society, like sometimes I think the show was set in like the 80s or something because they didn't know what screenshots were. And that's because in order to use technology, you need infrastructure. And there's no infrastructure anymore, right? So the only thing left are these machines that don't need Wi-Fi, right? Like arcades and anything you can put a coin in. So all the stuff, all the development is just gone, right? Like these kids, you know, they're in the future, but they're like living in the past. The episode starts off with this shot of like a neighborhood, and there's like a trail of blood. And the amount of work Ellie must have done to drag Joel's body to this house was incredible. And I really thought she was gonna leave him there for a second, right? Like he kind of has a tear in his eye. He's like, damn, like she's really gonna listen to me like right now. So, you know, it looked like she was thinking about it. And by the end of this episode, we realized that she was never going to leave him. And her backstory explains why. And the ending was perfect because we got so used to people either killing themselves or dying or something terrible happened. But the episode ends with Ellie trying to save Joel, right? It doesn't end with Ellie killing Riley. Because we can assume that Ellie is the one who ended Riley's life, right? Because in previous episodes, she did say that, you know, she has hurt people before. And so I think the person that she hurt was Riley. And Ellie's reaction to being infected was really interesting because she was terrified, right? She didn't know what to expect. And she went from like the happiest moment of her life, right? They're about to run away together, they're about to be together, they're about to commit to each other, to the saddest moment of her life, right? Like, come with me and have the greatest night of your life. You know, come with me and have the worst night of your life. It's sad because they were supposed to die together, right? They're kind of a younger Bill and Frank. You know, I think Ellie says at one point, you matter to me first. You know, it's kind of a less poetic, you know, child speak for, you know, the way Bill and Frank were able to express their love, but they were kind of each other's purpose. And I think Ellie was okay with dying with Riley, but when she didn't, you know, I think she was forced to kill her. I'm curious to know how Marlene and the Fireflies knew that Ellie was immune, because there's something wrong with the timeline, like correct me if I'm wrong, but was she immune before the bite? Like, was she born immune or something? Because why is it that Marlene does not allow Ellie to come with Riley and join the Fireflies, right? Because if I recall from the first episode, they did say that they put her there because they thought that she would be safe with Fedra. So this is the moment that Ellie realizes she's immune. The question is, how on earth did all these other people know that she was immune? Towards the end, Riley apologizes to Ellie, right? She says, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for putting you in this position, because she came back for her. And Ellie, she decided to come with Riley. And watching her try to save Joel is interesting, because this is a decision that, Joel was forced to make. He told her time and time again, like, I can't do this. You need to go with Tommy. And I'm sure she feels bad about it, because had she gone with Tommy, I don't think they would have gotten the jump on him. So she's kind of having that reverse guilt, right? Where it's like, oh my God, like, I did this to you, and now she has to fix it. I think Joel's decision to stay with Ellie was like out of a different type of loyalty. Like, he kind of decided to do it to finish the job type thing. But Ellie's different. Her loyalty to people is very deep. And she has this interesting sense of loyalty. Like, during the flashback, she can be seen like reading comic books, and like she's very heavily into comic books. And especially, during the flashback, she was really mourning the loss of her friend Riley. And she has this need to not only like do something great, but she wants to do it with someone else, right? She's been looking for her partner in crime, her sidekick, and that was Riley, right? And now that Riley's gone, Joel is the only person that she feels that can kind of like, that she connects with in that way, that they can kind of like have this dream, right? Like, to kind of do it together, So I get the sense that she really wants a partner in crime. Like, once she's loyal to someone, she just kind of stays loyal. There's no way that she was going to leave him, because she knows the feeling of being left behind, and she wasn't about to make Joel feel that way. And in terms of organization, I loved how we cut back to Ellie searching for something to save Joel after we find out there's nothing she can do to save Riley, right? She's breaking things, she's angry, she's like smashing the place, but when it comes to Joel, she's very calm and collected, and she's looking around for something. But sadly, Ellie is not Frank, right? So there's a scene in episode 3 where Bill is shot, but Frank is able to sew him up. And I don't think Ellie has that skill. There's a lot of tension in this episode, right? So the flashback literally starts as Ellie is trying to, we think, leaving him behind. And then we get her backstory. And so we find out that Ellie grew up with Fedra. She's like I guess all these kids there are like orphans, like their parents died and they just kind of needed to put them somewhere. They're kind of like child soldiers in training, I guess. And what stood out to me is that she was always singled out for like special attention, right? She was always meant for something greater. So since Riley's departure, she's been getting into fights, like that first girl. She totally misread her, but Ellie's unhappy and she wants everybody to know about it. And the officer in charge of the QZ basically sits her down, and this is the first time we get this conversation about choices, like you can go this way or you can go this way. And he basically says you can either just be another survivor, right? We can put you in the worst detail, you can end up just being like the rest of them out there, or you can become an officer. Right? He kind of gives her some hope. This idea of becoming an officer is really interesting because it's a bit like we've seen Fedra from the other side, right? Like they abuse people, they hang people, they do all these things, and maybe his decision to promote Ellie has to do with the fact that she doesn't know anything about the world prior to the pandemic. So she's more likely to be loyal to them. And that was the vibe I was getting, because not everybody gets this choice of being an officer, right? Like Riley didn't get the choice to be an officer. And so in that moment, Ellie makes the decision to kind of, get used to the idea of Fedra. And she gets used to the idea of possibly becoming an officer. And she looks out for her future instead of her present moment, right? She doesn't let these emotions she decides in that moment, although she's sad, she's going to start behaving well again. And the contrast between Ellie and Riley is really interesting because Riley, from what I saw, based on their conversation, she remembers the world prior to the pandemic, right? Like she knows what the word escalator means, like she's aware of it. And I understood why she didn't really make a great officer, because Ellie was able to pick up on a lot of things very quickly. So the first time Riley and Ellie have this talk, this heart-to-heart, right, where Riley basically reveals why she truly left, she lies, right? She says she was scouted by the Fireflies. They liked the way she snuck around. And in reality, what probably happened was she went looking for them. Like, I doubt they recruited her like that. And she kind of goes on to say that she wants to lead the revolution, right? Like, she's very impassioned about this cause. and Fedra, like she's leaving evil Fedra. Like that's the way she framed it to Ellie, the first sort of conversation they have together. The second time, when Ellie kind of insists, right? Like that's the thing about Ellie. She's very like she always like pushes back slowly. Like she makes people comfortable and then she asks them a question. The other thing I noticed about Ellie is how she's always repeating things again and again. Like if you notice, she's always repeating back what other people tell her. And I think like in doing so, she's able to pick up like discrepancies. So the second time she asks her, Riley basically opens up and reveals the fact that, you know, she was given her duty in Fedra to become, I think they said sewage duty. Like they kind of gave her the worst posting possible. Like she was not considered to be an officer. They gave her the lowest possible grade, you know, like the worst thing you could possibly do. And she says in that moment she panicked and she ran away, right? She just, that's how they saw her, and she didn't really want to accept that. I think that whole posting, it's interesting because with Fedra there's a hierarchy. And in that moment, she realized where she stood in the hierarchy and she didn't like it. Whereas with the Fireflies, she senses like a community, right? Like they're all equals. Like they're not gonna force her to, you know, they gave her a posting at the mall. Like she has some importance there. And she kind of compared this sense of importance with the same sense of importance that she had, you know, when she had her family. So she remembers a time prior to the pandemic and she wants that sense of community again. But unfortunately for her, there's something missing, and that's Ellie. And I think the reason she came back for Ellie is in hopes that they would somehow run away together, right? Like I think there was that hope, but she was too scared to say it. Riley goes through great lengths to organize this date. And we find out later that the reason that she's able to know how everything operates is, you know, because Fedra posted her there. And I was very impressed again by the fact that Ellie was able to pick these things up, right? Like whether it be in the photo booth with the money, the arcade where it's clear that she's played the game a few times, till their last moment when she finds the bomb, you know, just before they're sharing like their book of jokes. And this book of jokes is really fascinating because they kind of, this is Riley's last gift to Ellie. And then as I understand, she kept that gift. And this book is kind of how she starts to bond with Joel, right? Like kind of loosen him up a bit. So Ellie's very good at getting people to feel comfortable around her and kind of weaving her way in, because God knows, like we thought she was annoying and now she's not so annoying anymore. So the book she kept, I wonder what happened to the photos that she took in the photo booth. Like that was something else I was like, I wonder why she didn't, like, what happened to those pictures? The scene that struck out at me the most, or was a highlight for me, was the moment that Ellie finds the bombs, right? But just before then, they're having this kind of warm moment, and they're bonding over this book of jokes. And then Ellie spots the bombs, and as soon as she spots the bombs, she reads Riley for filth, right? She tells her straight up, like, this was never about me. You've been here many times. Like from just finding these bombs, she's able to suss out everything. And she's been doing it throughout the whole episode, right? She's been testing her, like, oh, maybe I can come back tomorrow, or maybe I can do this. But she knows that Riley is kind of hiding something. And this conversation closely parallels the one with Tommy and Joel, because just before Ellie storms off, she basically says, I guess we'll see, right? Because she kind of goes in on Riley. She makes it known that, listen, I know you're here, like you weren't scouted. You have no power in this organization. The fact that you control who gets bombed by like who these bombs will be used against is not Riley's decision. And so she leaves. She says, we'll see. And this whole we'll see attitude kind of triggers Riley to open up, right? So the first conversation she has, the second conversation, now the third one, she's able to fully kind of, like it's accelerated. Right now she has to open up and just kind of go for it. And she tells her straight up, like, I'm leaving. I'm going to Atlanta. I tried to get you to come with me. And this is the situation, right? I came to say goodbye. And she kind of stops short of saying, come with me. But that's essentially like what she was hiding. And, you know, as upset as Ellie is, I was very impressed by the fact that she came back for Riley, right? She's angry. She leaves them all. And then she comes back. So actually, Ellie is not someone who leaves people behind, right? Like she's someone who will always come back for you, because she has this weird sense of loyalty, to the point where she heard these screams and she thought Riley was in trouble, and she ran back, and this kind of took her to the last wonder of them all, right? So their last kind of moment together was in this this Halloween shop. And I thought it was funny how they were like pretending to be monsters just before a real monster came out. This last dance before the infected comes out. I mean, this episode was very, very well organized. Like the way they built up tension was phenomenal, because at first, they just seem like friends. And then you get some awkward moments, right? Like stares here and there. Riley's arm over Ellie's shoulder for a little bit too long. The arcade where they're just about to go for it. But, it was like bordering on just awkward. Like none of them can take the leap, right? And even to the bitter end, Riley couldn't take the leap even when Ellie found the bombs, right? They keep holding back. And so this scene is very much shot like a dance floor, right? Like the lighting, they're on the counter, like everything about the way the scene was shot was very well done. And I love how they're just having fun as friends. And then Ellie just kind of slows down, right? Like she's unable to hide her affection for Riley anymore. And then they just have that moment and they fully commit to each other. This decision to fully be partners. And it's very similar to what we saw in the last episode, where Joel and Ellie were very much they felt like partners. And now this dancing or this beating around the bush is done, right? They kind of committed to each other, and in that moment they said, we're never gonna leave each other again, right? Like that was the energy they were giving. And the best moment was immediately, it became the worst moment ever. In terms of the infected, this was a very strange scene, because if Riley is posted in the mall by Fedra, how is it that nobody saw the infected? Right? Like how is it possible that he was there for so long? Right? Like something about that just didn't really make any sense. And I feel like Riley has spent enough time in the mall that she would have noticed that, because just before they even enter the mall, they're kind of walking around and they notice that there's a drunk guy, like a guy who's just dead, and I guess we know what he was doing. And Riley says that this man was not there the night before, right? So Riley clearly does notice things. So how she didn't notice this infected there, I wasn't really sure. The scene at the arcade triggers the infected, and it also explains why when she was with Joel that she picked the character Melina when they were in that convenience store. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was the same character. So anyways, they're in the arcade, they're laughing, they're having fun, and I guess he's just lying in an American, in an American girl store. Like, is he, like, I felt that was an oversight. Like, you guys let me know. How is it that Fedra didn't see this one infected? So the moment the infected comes out, that was really interesting, because the infected is fast, but they also had a gun. But I guess the only way to kill this infected is to stab it in the head. Like, there's no other way. Like, shooting it will not help. And as soon as this infected came out, I knew this is how Ellie got infected, because it didn't really make any sense. Like, he was really clawing at them. He was really going in. Like, it was clear that there's no way they were going to get out of that without being infected. So the episode ends and we don't see what happens to Riley, right? We don't see her change. They kind of do us the favor of not showing Ellie killing Riley, and I think they want us to remember just how they were. Very similar to how they didn't show us how Bill and Frank died, right? Like, they don't show us them in the bed and their corpse, they just leave the window open. And this backstory makes something very clear, because Ellie lost her loved one, right? Like, she lost her one and only, right? So Joel is not the only one that's lost someone, right? So Ellie literally lost the person that she felt was her purpose, I feel like. And without Joel, I'm not really sure how much longer she could go on for. So it was a great ending. I don't know how much longer Joel can survive, right? Like, I'm curious. The last 2 episodes are directed by a guy who directed the movie Holy Spider. So the last 2 episodes, I think, will be very dynamic, very exciting, and very just confident. I don't know. I don't think everyone's gonna like how the episode ends. Like, I feel like the writers have a story to tell. They're very deliberate. They clearly know where this is going, and they don't really care if you like it or not. So you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.